Some things echo louder in silence. The kind of silence found in an empty basketball gym at 2 in the morning, where dust dances in the cold blue light slipping through the high windows, and the wooden floor creaks with memory. It is sacred. This stillness. The net sways gently, not from a recent shot, but from the breath of time itself. No crowd, no scoreboard. Just remnants of motion and ambition long past. Some places never forget who walked them, and sometimes they whisper back. If you listen close, you can still hear it, the echo of sneakers sliding against hardwood, the soft rhythm of a bouncing ball in repetition, and the hushed exhale of someone alone, chasing something invisible, not victory, not applause, but perfection. Again and again and again, there's something beautifully lonely about greatness. It does not arrive with fireworks or spotlights. It begins in solitude, with a child, a dream, and the decision, perhaps a foolish one at first, to keep coming back, to keep reaching, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. Under the fluorescent hum of forgotten courts, greatness whispers, not shouts. Behind locked gym doors and chain-link fences rusted by time, a heartbeat persists against the cold, before anyone called him a legend, before the records, the parades, and the portraits painted tall as buildings. He was just a boy, alone, in love with the game, the kind of love that asks everything, offers little, and returns only the sound of a ball falling through a net in a space too large to hold a child's dream. But he needed nothing else, not yet. Sometimes when night is especially quiet and the world has slowed enough to let the heart speak, you may find yourself wondering what becomes of such boys. What becomes of someone who lives for the search, who aches not for the prize, but for mastery. His name was Kobe Bean Bryant. Spoken slowly, it feels heavier than it used to. A name shaped over decades, not only by brilliance, but by trials, flaws, fire, the shredding of ego and the poetry of transformation. He was not made in front of cameras, nor carved from luck. He was born in shadows, perfected in stillness, resurrected in pain. This isn't a story about basketball. Not really. It's about obsession, about how quiet hunger can become deafening when ignored, about the cost of chasing something no one else can see, and the beauty of staying in motion long after your wings tear, because the sky still feels close. This isn't about the points, or the trophies, or the titles. This isn't a journal of statistics. It's a meditation on promise. It's about sitting with ghosts, listening to them, because if you listen closely enough, some still speak, with each soft bounce of the ball, with every staggered breath taken, between silence and motion. The whispers of a game are eternal, and he was its echo. He did not begin with greatness. He began, like many Duke Wyatt, a little too serious for a boy, eyes filled with watchfulness rather than wonder. But he watched because he already knew something others hadn't yet learned. That time is precious, that practice isn't punishment, that solitude isn't loneliness, it's preparation. The gym became his sanctuary, the ball his prayer bead, and the repetition his scripture. Some would call it obsession, others madness, but he called it normal, because, for some, the dream doesn't start at the buzzer or the draft or the standing ovation. It starts in the still dark, when even the stars are sleeping, and the only sound brave enough to break the silence is the brush of leather against concrete, again, again, again. What does it mean to be haunted by potential? To wake up every day unsure if you've done enough? to obsess not over how you'll be remembered, but whether you've grown even a sliver better than the day before. And when you feel like quitting, not because it's hard, but because perfection still feels 1,000 miles away, what then? Then you shoot again. That was his rhythm. That was the song he played beneath his breath, over and over, until the echoes weren't haunting, they were home. Even from the beginning, there was a gravity to him, a composed stillness wrapped in the frame of a child. While others yelled, he watched. While others posed, he studied. He could recite entire games from memory, footwork sequences the way another child might trade baseball cards. He didn't ask to be seen. He measured time by how many free throws he could bank before the sun crept through the school windows. In a world where youth is often pressed to smile and be light, he chose a quieter shade. And though it made some feel uneasiest if something inside him knew more than it should, it also made him inevitable. You could feel it, especially in the silence. He became the boy who never stopped working, not because someone told him he had to, but because nothing else tasted as real. The sound of the ball, the rhythm of the pivot, the stillness before the shot. This was prayer. This was pursuit. And each echo through the empty court was a stanza in a love letter not yet written, but it would be. Many years from that silence, with his knees weary and body bent, he would sit and write it. Dear basketball, a poetic surrender to the game that gave him everything, and a game to which, in turn, he gave everything he had. But that letter was still far off, for now he was only a child, a name with no legend, a dreamer without proof, and yet something about him already carried the weight of prophecy, not because he was destined, but because he decided, every day, every hour, to meet the silence head-on. There's a reason silence comes before storms, before greatness grows tall. It first kneels unseen, unheard, often doubted, and in that still night, on that quiet court beneath stars that barely blinked, he made a promise to himself. He would chase beauty through the game, with or without applause, with or without mercy, until the very end. Summer in Italy has its own rhythm. The days spill out in golden quiet, where time moves slowly enough to notice the way lavender sways in the breeze, and children's laughter drifts like dust above cobblestone streets. In small towns along the Mediterranean, under sun-stained roofs and balconies filled with drying laundry, there walked a boy, slender, wide-eyed, and often silent. He didn't speak the language, not fluently, but language has never been the thing that connects people. Most of all, for him, it was the sound of a bouncing basketball. Not quite a melody, not quite a heartbeat, but something in between. He was the son of a journeyman. Joe Jellybean Bryant played professional basketball, and the game carried their family far from Philadelphia to places where sand and pine trees met ancient brick walls. Italy, a home away from homeland. Here, Kobe Bean Bryant grew not just in age, but in texture, the edges of his identity beginning to form, sharpened by both love and loneliness. He played with kids who couldn't pronounce his name, who spoke with gestures and grins, who shared their snacks and gestured toward the ball, inviting him in. He smiled back, unsure of the words, but never the invitation. The game said what he couldn't, and so he played, on outdoor courts warmed by the southern sun, with backboards stained by age and nets that barely held shape. He practiced, alone, mostly, with a fervor most couldn't understand and none imitated. Court time wasn't dictated by practice schedules. It was dictated by hunger, by something he couldn't quite name yet, but already listened to more than anyone else. He studied, not school, though he did that too, but movements. Details, the flick of a wrist, the way weight transferred during a spin move. He'd mimic players on television, freeze-framing his favorites when the VCR allowed it. Then out he'd go beneath the open sky, trying to imitate the artistry he saw. Not once, not twice. Endlessly, he single quotes deplay games by himself. Assign defenders. In his mind, keep score. He'd argue phantom fouls and imagine last second. Buzzer beaters alone wasn't lonely. It was necessary. His mother made sure he had structure. His father gave him freedom. Long car rides became classrooms. The scent of leather and air conditioning mixed with lessons in footwork, spacing, respect. They'd talk for hours, not always about basketball, but it always came back to it. Always. He admired his father, but he didn't want to be him. He wanted more. There was a moment, perhaps a quiet one, unnoticed by even himself, when joy began to cradle obsession, when the lines blurred between love and purpose. He'd watch Michael Jordan play on tape, rewind, play it again, then again. Then outside he'd go, determined not just to admire, but to become what he lacked in community. He built in muscle memory. The Italian countryside faded with time, but the discipline forged there did not. His days in Reggio Emilia weren't filled with pressure, but they were filled with repetition, with intent. The world outside was loud, unpredictable, but the court, whether cracked or waxed, was always the same size, always waiting. He returned to the United States as a stranger to his birthplace. Suburban Philadelphia didn't feel much like home. The streets were faster, the smiles quicker and more suspicious. He was a black kid with Italian sensibilities, speaking the language with a gentle accent that marked him as other kids teased him. He didn't know who the hottest rappers were. His slang sounded strange. And while they played video games, he was diagramming plays, studying moves, isolating truths in slow motion like a scientist bent over a microscope. Still, he kept to himself. There was no bitterness, just resolve. When classmates went out after school, he stayed behind in the gym. Long after the janitors finished sweeping the halls and the sun had disappeared behind the thick Pennsylvania trees, he remained. Flickering lights overhead, one ball, one hoop, one dream. Even then, he wasn't working toward fame. He was reaching for something purer, clean form, a sharper turn, a tighter handle, 1 millimeter better than yesterday. He journaled his progress, scribbled notes in notebooks, formulas for footwork, pictures of arc, variations of timing. It wasn't that he didn't want friends. He just hadn't found anyone else willing to speak his language, because dedication, in its rawest form, often isolates before it elevates. People talk about talent like it's a lightning bolt, loud, sudden, divine. They rarely talk about the trenches it digs. Before striking, Kobe was already in the trenches by the time he was 13. He wasn't dreaming of the NBA. He was preparing for it. Hunger has a peculiar shape in young prodigies. It's not the same hunger that drives the average hopeful. It's more like a quiet roar under the skin, a need to chase something invisible that feels completely real to the one who sees it. His teammates began noticing. Coaches spoke of him in hushed excitement. Scouts nodded quietly from corners of the bleachers. There was electricity rising at Lower Marion High School. His shine began turning visible. The gym, with its green banners and steel bleachers, became his proving ground. One by one, games turned into symphonies with him as the conductor. Unafraid, unhurried, but unrelenting. He lifted the team in every way a teenager could, all while carrying notebooks filled with trackings of his own failures, things to work on. Even in victory, he was chasing a ghost, his best self. He practiced before dawn. He shot when others slept. He studied moves as if decoding scripture. He viewed the court as canvas, and his limbs the brushes, and yet he remained quiet. There was no boast, no spike of ego, only elegance. He once said what pushed him wasn't achieving greatness, but the fear of not fulfilling his potential. There's a subtle difference. There one asks for approval, the other refuses to rest. By 17, the choice was before him. College offers stacked like autumn leaves. Prestige, reputation, safety. But safety never built champions. The NBA called and he answered, not with hesitation, but clarity. He wasn't skipping chapters. He was writing his own story in a different ink. The world around him blinked in shock, but he wasn't blinking. He was ready, because the boy who bounced balls, alone under the Italian sun and trained in empty Philadelphia gyms, wasn't chasing applause. He was chasing his own limits, and discovering he hadn't found them yet. There's a quiet kind of storm that builds inside some people, not the kind that rages outward with thunder and lightning, but one that churns beneath the skin, measured, patient, constant. By the time Kobe Bryant stepped into the halls of Lower Marion High School, that storm had been simmering for years. He wore it differently than most teenagers. Quiet in the locker room, focused in the classroom, singular on the court. Where others found distraction, he found rhythm. Where others relaxed, he refined. And every day, long after the team had finished practice, one light remained on in the gym. That's where you'd find him, alone, shooting, dribbling, repeating, not from punishment, never from desperation. He was sculpting something invisible, building muscle memory into muscle instinct. He started logging his extra hours, tracking every shot, every routine. He kept journals not of dreams, but of data. Hours practiced, mistakes made, corrections noted. He saw himself as more than an athlete. He was a craftsman in each repetition, a brushstroke in a larger picture only he could see. At home, he would freeze tapes of NBA games, Michael Jordan's footwork, her key pivots. He didn't admire greatness from a distance. He studied it, he dissected it, then he chased it down with unwavering clarity. To call it passion would be too soft. It was a calling. By his junior year, the whispers had begun. A kid from the suburbs with a toolbox too polished for his age. There was smoothness to his movements, like something ancient carried in a young frame. Every crossover was timed, every step back measured, every pass a calculation. The game didn't just happen around him, it flowed through him. Scouts came to watch, journalists took notes, but he didn't flinch. He barely acknowledged the attention, because it wasn't new. He'd been preparing for this moment since before the world knew to look. The numbers rose. 30 points, 40. He broke the Southeastern Pennsylvania scoring record, one held by Wilt Chamberlain, but the record didn't satisfy him, not even close. It was never about the scoreboard. It was about the feel, the control, the artistry. Mistakes haunted him more than losses, and losses didn't haunt him as much as stagnation. Improvement was his only compass. The rest was noise. His teammates recall his discipline with reverence and disbelief. Morning practices before school, weight room after study hall. He'd shoot until his fingers blistered, then keep shooting. At 18, he had already learned what took most a lifetime to discover. Only through sacrifice does talent become legacy. Recruiters swarmed. Every major college knocked North Carolina, Michigan. But there was a gleam in his eye when he spoke of the NBA, not as fantasy, but as future. He tried on the idea like a tailored suit, and it fit. He declared for the draft. The leap from high school to the league had only been attempted a handful of times, each one controversial, each one scrutinized. Still, he didn't waver, because he believed what others feared to hope, that readiness isn't always found through age. Sometimes it's forged through intent. The 1996 NBA draft, a blur of lights, suits, and uncertainty. 13 picks pass. Then Charlotte selects Kobe Bryant, 13th overall. But destiny had already been rewritten before the ink dried. The Lakers called. A trade was arranged. Just like that, he was headed to Los Angeles. He posed awkwardly with a Hornets hat he'd never wear, shook hands with executives he'd never play for. Behind the forced smiles was something real, though resolve. He walked into his first Lakers press conference wearing a suit too big, smiling but cautious. Reporters questioned his youth, his maturity, his readiness, but he answered softly, calmly, not with swagger, with certainty. Training camp came, and with it, the truth. He wasn't the strongest, wasn't the tallest, wasn't the fastest, but no one outworked him. Veterans watched him arrive early, leave last, not as a stunt, not for attention. It was just who he was. The boy who shot in silence now, standing under the lights, still working, still searching. Early games were a roller coaster, flashes of brilliance, jumpers that fell like feathers. Then mistakes, rookie errors, impatience. Fans cheered and questioned in the same breath. Was he too young? Was it too soon? But he kept going, kept learning. There were nights he didn't score, nights the ball slipped from his hands, but each stumble became a lesson, each lesson a layer. He wasn't discouraged. He was data gathering, refining himself into the player he'd become. Veterans called him arrogant, said he didn't smile enough. Teammates questioned his loner ways, but he wasn't being difficult. He was thinking differently. While some saw the game as a job, he saw it as a language, one he intended to speak fluently. By the end of his rookie season, the outline was clear. A young player who would not be tamed by pressure, whose eyes never dropped after a miss, whose fingers reached constantly for more. The city of Los Angeles wasn't sold yet, but it was starting to listen. He wore number 8. By accident, a nod to infinity turned upright, symbol of beginnings. Ambition pressed into fabric every time he stepped onto the court. One night, after another extra practice, he stood under the rafters of the Forum, gazing at the retired jerseys, the banners, the ghosts. He didn't smile, didn't dream, only stared, not with envy, but with expectation. It was never a question of if, it was a matter of when. The ceiling of that gym was crowded with legends. He wasn't trying to join them, he was preparing to surpass them. This was only the beginning, and already you could hear the whispers rising. Some legacies are written in gold, others in fire. And for a time, Kobe Bryant's legacy was being forged in both. The number 8 stitched to his chest wasn't just an identifier. It was a warning, a symbol of hunger unchecked. The boy had grown. His limbs stronger, his movements sharper, and the soft obsessions of youth had calcified into a cutting edge. His arrival in the NBA had been careful, patient. But now, the mask was off. He did not chase approval, only excellence, and his pursuit of it became relentless. The Lakers, once sleeping giants, began to stir again, with Shaquille O'Neal commanding the paint and Kobe rising like smoke around him. Something seismic was forming. Two titans sharing space, but not always harmony. They needed each other to win, but wanted very different things. Kobe, still in his early 20s, had little interest in catering to egos. Not even Shaq's. He didn't joke in the locker room, didn't bow to pecking orders. He showed up earlier than anyone, stayed later. He wanted to be the best not on the team, but in the world. And that kind of wanting, that kind of fire, it burns whatever gets too close. Their chemistry on the court was undeniable, electrifying. 3 straight championships, 2000, 2001, 2002, dominance that looked effortless, but was anything but. Kobe was still learning how to be a teammate, still learning how to talk, how to trust. But even then, in the middle of history being made, you could feel the tension tightening beneath the applause. He was growing faster than comfort allowed, and like all things built on pressure, cracks began to widen. Kobe's style evolved during those years, more calculating, more surgical. He studied defenses like riddles, approaching each game not with joy, but with a kind of grim artistry. There were moments of wizardry, reverse layups that defied gravity, pull-ups with defenders tangled around him like vines. But there was no showboating, no gestures to the crowd. His celebration was the absence of error. And still, despite all the winning, whispers began to spread. He doesn't pass enough. He takes too many risks. He's selfish, and perhaps, in some ways, they were right. He demanded more from his teammates than many could give, expected the same obsession, the same pain tolerance. He couldn't understand hesitation or complacency, and when he saw it, he distanced himself, not out of cruelty, but out of impatience. He had no time for less than everything, but shadows were gathering, not just from inside locker rooms, but from his own footsteps. In 2003, the story changed. A trip to Colorado. A young woman, an accusation that split the world in two. Headlines pummeled newsstands. Endorsements fell away like brittle leaves. A man the world thought they understood was suddenly a question mark, blurred between public image and private. Nightmare the legal process would play out. Settled, complicated, never truly closed, but inside, Kobe's something fractured. He spoke less, trusted even fewer. His movements grew sharper, more distant. And on the court, a different hunger emerged, not for beauty, but for vindication. That season, he scored with fury, a sharp-edged brilliance that made defenders look like shadows. But the light that followed him now was harsher, less golden, more fluorescent. Critics painted him as a villain. Teammates began to turn. His relationship with Shaq ruptured, unable to withstand the mistrust. They reached the finals again in 2004, but defeat came swift and painful. The dynasty was undone. Shaq left. The locker room emptied, and Kobe was left alone. Again, at the center of a game he once called home. Number 8 stood in the rubble, and it wasn't just the team that had changed. He had. Gone was the boy smiling in Oversized suits. Gone was the wonder. What remained was intensity layered in armor. The flame still burned, brighter even, but now it didn't warm, it scorched. And still, he worked, reinvented his game, carried a depleted roster on his back through seasons where hope was a stranger. 50-point nights, 70 games, he lost by inches despite summoning basketball poetry from his fingertips. But the brilliance didn't silence the doubt. If anything, it fed it. They said he wasn't a leader, said he poisoned chemistry, said he'd win again only when he surrendered ego. And he listened, not to agree, but to understand. Greatness is not a steady climb. It twists, it descends, it disorients. And when the world calls a man a villain, he starts to question what kind of hero he really is. The number 8 was forged in eagerness, molded by promise. But it reached its limit. It was no longer enough to be great. He needed to become something else, so he let part of himself die. Quietly, no parade, no speech, just a jersey exchange. Number 8 was done, and in its place, something colder emerged. He gave it a name, not Kobe, not Bryant, but Mamba, black, silent, lethal, and reborn. The Black Mamba was not born in triumph. He was forged in silence. There's a kind of darkness that follows. Public humiliation of silence so large it swallows everything except your thoughts. For Kobe Bryant, the years between glory and redemption were neither glamorous nor forgiving. They were laced with doubt, covered in frost, marked by headlines, fallouts, and isolation. But it's in the quiet aftermath of collapse that reinvention begins. He crafted the alter ego not out of vanity, survival, to separate the man from the weight, to focus only on the work. The Mamba was not emotional. He didn't flinch at criticism, didn't seek affection. The Mamba was surgical, cool, precise, detached. In shedding number 8, Kobe peeled back the skin of expectation, and underneath stood something colder, but not hollow. He filled that space with fire again, this time, controlled, purposeful, deadly. There were no rings those years, no parades, just nights spent dissecting the game with the same care a surgeon gives to steel. He was no longer rising with others. Now he played alone. Not selfishly, but singularly, for something he still refused to name. The league had shifted. Were forming. Friends became allies on the court. But not for him. Friendship didn't fuel competition. Pain did. Training sessions bled into each other as legend grew around his work ethic. 4 a.m. weight sessions, high-altitude cardio, learning new languages just to talk trash more personally, eating strictly, sleeping little. There was nothing glamorous about it. In 2006, he scored 81 points against the Toronto Raptors. Let the number sit, 80-1, second only to Wilt, but more than a record. It was a message, an exhale of everything he chose not to say. For 48 minutes, he was untouchable, a ghost with hands. Time bent around his movements. Baskets fell like rainfall, quiet, relentless, unstoppable. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't grinning. He was cleansing. Yet even in dominance, critics clung to their narrative. Kobe couldn't win without Shaq. He couldn't lead a team. He didn't belong in the conversation with Jordan. His excellence, they said, had edges, too sharp to carry others. And still, he waited. Rings wouldn't come through force. Not anymore. He needed rhythm, chemistry, trust, not blind, but earned. And then came PAU, but PAU Gasol was not built like Kobe. He was graceful, quieter even, a European big man with skill and humility. And Kobe, for the first time in years, recognized something more valuable than dominance: trust. They became brothers, not through similarity, but through intention. Poe's presence softened the attack. Kobe learned how to pass again, not because he had to, but because someone finally met him halfway, with Phil Jackson back at the helm. The triangle offense clicked in their hands like string pulled taut. Poetry started to return, not the fluttery, kind, but the clipped, tight form of a haiku. Everything mattered: footwork, space, tempo. Kobe leaned into mentorship, not as a lecture, but as a demonstration. Younger players began to orbit him, not afraid, but reverent. They saw the bruises beneath the brilliance, the losses behind the expectations, and the work, the relentless, grinding, almost inhuman effort. It made people believe again. 2009. The finals returned. Against Orlando, they didn't just win, they imposed a will. Kobe lifted the trophy with his daughters in his arms, his screams accidentally breaking through the stone-faced poise he'd taught himself to wear. Not joy, exactly, more like release. Then 2010, the Celtics, again. This was more than a rivalry, it was a confession booth, a platform carrying decades of blood between cities. The series bruised everyone involved, and yet, in Game 7, when nothing landed, when Kobe missed far more than he made, he grabbed 15 rebounds, he passed, he defended. He gave everything he had with the poetry removed just cost. And when the final horn sounded, he held up 5 fingers. 5 not to silence doubters, but to prove something to himself: he could rebuild and rise. Not as number 8, but as something fiercer, something truer. But by then, something else had begun to bloom: fatherhood. His face softened near his daughters. With Gianna curled at his side, his voice lifted differently. There wasn't just fire behind his eyes. Now there was depth, too. Games ended and responsibilities began. He started coaching, quietly, watching his girls train, mapping drills with the same precision he used on himself. He didn't reduce his drive, it just transferred. Kobe no longer needed the spotlight. He wanted tools to pass along. He started writing, animating, teaching. A world champion who now spoke in bedtime rhythms, teaching stories instead of plays. Never abandoning competitiveness, but evolving it. This was the second legacy. One that didn't rely on numbers or banners, but on who he became when the spotlight turned away. The Mamba was never just a performance mechanism. It was growth armor, and in peeling it back, Kobe Bryant showed that being cold didn't mean being heartless. It meant being brave enough to survive, to adapt, and finally to give. Because true greatness isn't just about how high you rise, it's about who you become when you're done rising. The banners still hung as they always had: bold, golden, unmoving. But Kobe had changed. So had the floor beneath him. By 2010, he wasn't chasing shadows anymore. He stood alone, now not as a man at war, but as a craftsman fully immersed in his medium. The 5th championship had come against Boston, his oldest rival, and it hadn't come with flair or finesse. Not really. It came with bruises, with blood, with sacrifice. That Game 7 wasn't one of his prettiest. The shots didn't fall as they once did. The bounce off his first step carried less lift, but he altered the tempo, grabbed 15 rebounds, reinvented himself inside 48 minutes. He let will replace rhythm, let grit replace grace. That was growth. Unseen, but certain, he held the trophy without a grin, more exhale than exaltation. The pain was beginning to linger longer after games. Ankles swelled more, knees tugged harder, but he told no one. He smiled for the cameras, ice packs, undersuits, and planned summer workouts before the champagne. Dried because it wasn't over. Not yet. He began to speak more openly about legacy, not in terms of statistics or GOAT debates, but artistry. The beauty of footwork, the geometry of a perfect fadeaway. He read books on Dan Baryshnikov. Martha Graham watched hours of ballet, not for the stage, but for the step, for the placement of heel and toe on parquet syllables. Basketball was still a language to him, but now it was poetry, not fire. You could see it when he walked into the gym, slower now, but more complete, like a painter who had finally seen every corner of the canvas. Then came 2013, a quiet Friday night against Golden State. Things were tight. Every possession mattered. Time bled. Kobe, already playing nearly every minute in those final weeks, was willing the Lakers into playoff contention. His body screamed, and then knit broke. A sharp pop behind the Achilles, the calf tightening like a snare, the foot refusing to obey. He knew instantly, not because of pain, but because of absence. He'd lost control of a body he trusted more than anything else. Kobe fell, then stood, limped to the line, the air stiff with shock, and still he sank both free throws. Flat-footed, no complaint, no ceremony, then walked off the court with a torn Achilles. Under his own power, the silence felt cathedral after the game. He posted a message, not of self-pity, but reflection. This is the walk that I've been preparing for. No one believed he'd come back. Most never returned the same. But Kobe wasn't most. He studied pain like he once studied footwork. Checked into rehab alone. Read endlessly books about endurance, about inevitability. He watched animals run across Californian hills, deer, wolves, film in another medium. Sometimes he didn't speak for days, but even so, he kept showing up, not to prove anyone wrong, but to test one last hypothesis, that a body can break and still house purpose. That year, his presence shifted. He became quieter, but more open. He greeted rookies with warmth now, offered advice in softer tones, not demanding, but instructive. He'd sit on benches with his leg elevated and talk about film angles, about reading defenders, not by foot, but by eye, small things, sacred things. This was no longer just a pursuit. It was an inheritance being shaped in real time. When he returned to the court, the fire was banked lower. His steps were heavier, but his mind burned brighter. He didn't need 48 minutes anymore, just moments. And when those moments came, baseline fades, turnaround jumpers, dagger threes, they landed with the weight of memory. The wins didn't follow like they used to. The roster was young, the league was faster, but Kobe remained present, and presence became victory. He spoke more about gratitude, less about domination. His daughters came courtside more often. Gianna, in particular, watching with the same hunger he once wore. He'd turn to her mid-game, pointing out trends, nudging her awareness, not as a show, but as a lineage being shaped beneath arena lights. Dear Basketball came into being during this stretch, a retirement letter in the form of a love poem. It wasn't written for his fans. Not exactly. It was written for the game. A ceremony of goodbye, graceful, honest, aching. He read it in voiceover with all the weight of someone pulling closed a door that raised him, warmed him, wounded him. The decision followed not long after. The 2015 to 2016 season would be his last. A farewell tour, not the kind where jersey numbers were lifted into the rafters every night, but one where every arena paused, just slightly to say thank you, and to wonder if they were witnessing the last of something. And in truth, they were. This wasn't just saying goodbye to a player. It was farewelling an archetype, the relentless, off-kilter, brutally honest artist of the hardwood. The last call came slowly, game by game, and he walked toward it, not with reluctance, with resolution. Not every night ended in triumph. Many were quiet losses, with minutes closely managed and glory tucked away. But still he suited up. He signed autographs with more frequency. He smiled more. People marveled at his humility. But it was never humility, it was peace. He had given everything. And that final season, he asked for nothing in return. Only space to say goodbye, on his terms. The lights had always felt warm, but that night they'd felt different. April 13th, 2016. One last night beneath the banners. One last night with the jersey stitched across his chest, with the roar of Los Angeles climbing the walls of the Staples Center like ivy. Every seat filled, every eye fixed. But he didn't look around to take it in. He didn't wave, he didn't bow. He simply walked to the baseline and began to stretch, as he had done for 2 decades. Routine was a comfort, and that night he craved peace more than praise. Kobe Bryant was saying goodbye, not through speeches, but through motion. The pre-game buzz swirled like incense thick, heavy with memory. Celebrities packed the front row, legends seated on either side, cameras blinking like stars. His family, close Gianna, watching with the same half-smile he once wore under the Mediterranean sun. Vanessa, steady beside her daughters, holding space for what this farewell meant. Still, he barely looked up, focused, controlled, silent. Once games like these were weightless to him. Another step toward rings, toward legacy. But now this night was made of lead, not heavy in dread, just dense in meaning. The ball tipped. The clock began, and for the first few minutes, the rhythm was unkind. Miss, turnover, legs slower than he remembered, hands not quite matching the speed of thought. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was this how it would end? Then, a crossover, mid-range pull-up swish. That sounds so familiar. Cut through the noise like a whisper in a storm. His first points of the night, and something clicked. The old rhythms stirred. Not fully, but enough. The fadeaways carried muscle memory worn, tested, but intact. The crowd began to rise, not in explosion, but in recognition. They weren't watching a game. They were watching a resurrection. Shot after shot found its way home. As the quarters passed, time did something strange. It bent, moments stretched, glances lingered longer. Applause felt thicker, and Kobe found his rhythm. It wasn't the explosiveness of his 20s. It wasn't the fearsome weight of the Mamba years. It was something older, rarer. A man pouring everything he had left, every last drop of exhausted beauty, into one final canvas. The points rose. 20, then 30. The crowd began marveling aloud. Surprised, almost disbelieving. Shaq courtside leaned in, laughing, shaking his head. "You gotta go for 50, he joked at halftime. A smile, not smug, just simple. Kobe nodded, as if to say, of course, we finish it all. Third quarter, then the fourth. Fatigue carved into his frame. His legs ached, chest heaving, sweat dripping through his jersey like ink on a farewell letter. But still, he didn't ask out, because the game wasn't over. Not until the story closed right then. The 47th point. The 5-1 St. Anne knells shimmered in the building. Not just nostalgia, not just fandom, a kind of reverence. This wasn't performance anymore, it was history. Each possession, the crowd rose. Some screamed, some sobbed. The opponents, the Utah Jazz, frozen in awe, but committed to defense, tightened up, forcing him. Left, right, double teams, pressing, it didn't matter. He kept scoring. 55, then 50-8. One last push, the ball in his hands. Final seconds, he dribbled high above the arc, shoulders low, defender close. A quick jab, then the long step to the right. Fade away, signature, timeless. 60 points. On the last night of the last game. Kobe Bryant, age 37, 20 seasons deep, had emptied the tank, not with tears, not with farewell ceremonies, but with a swan song disguised as a masterclass. The buzzer sounded, the crowd unglued. Teammates swarmed him, their faces a collision of disbelief and gratitude. Fans chanted his name through cracked voices, some laughing through tears. He stayed centered, in the chaos, as if buoyed, not by the applause, but by completion. He took the microphone, paused, smiled. You know, it's funny. I've been saying this for 20 years now. Mamba out. Then softly dropped the mic to the hardwood. No speech could have said more. No highlight reel could summarize it better. He waved once, walked toward the tunnel, past the crowd, past the cheers, toward silence, toward something beyond. And as his silhouette dissolved into shadows, the game let go of him, gently, respectfully, fully, but not entirely, because some echoes never stopped bouncing. The morning of January 26, 2020, arrived like any other. A quiet Sunday. Clouds hung low over Los Angeles. The hills were gray. The air thick with silence not yet broken. Some days take everything from us before we understand what they mean. There are events that shake the world with such force that even whispers seem too loud. When the news broke, it didn't feel real, because how could it? He had survived everything, injuries, eras, doubt, even time itself. But he was gone, so was Gianna. And in that cruel instant, the game changed again, not on the court, but in our hearts. What Kobe left behind wasn't just records or reels of dunks and fadeaways. It wasn't just championships or the gleam of gold medals. He left behind a frequency, a way of working, thinking, being that could not be buried. His legacy breathed beyond the lines. Every player who ever watched him in silence, every kid who mimicked a turnaround jumper, whispering Kobe into the wind, every parent awakened by a child insisting the early morning was meant for practice, not sleep. They carried him forward long before the statue, long before the murals, because Kobe Bryant was more than Kobe Bryant. He became language. When Jason Tatum studied film alone after team dinners, Kobe was there. When Kyrie Irving spoke of mentorship, not through drills, but through depth, Kobe was there. When Devin Booker pulled jerseys tight and mouthed the words, "Be legendary," Kobe echoed, even in retirement, even in stillness. He coached Gianna's team, not like a star showing off but as a father passing down secrets carefully. Spin moves, defensive footwork. He showed her the Mamba wasn't about branding, it was about devotion. He smiled more in those years, traded suits for sweats at weekend tournaments, published books, made films. His creativity re-emerged not as performance, but as legacy through storytelling. He once said he wanted to be remembered more as a storyteller than an athlete. And maybe that's what shook us most, because after all he'd done on the court, he was just getting started. We grieved because we lost a player, but we mourned because we lost a man mid-sentence. And now we're left with echoes, a daughter's laughter, a father's directive, a jumper's arc in the hands of a young girl shaped by his guidance, the sound of a ball on hardwood long after the gym should be empty. But none of it is empty. Not really, because the game still remembers. There are quiet moments when the arena empties, and only the lights remain, those soft overhead halos that once framed him mid-fadeaway. You can almost hear him breathing, thinking, watching, not from ghosts or fantasy, but impact. He's in the small decisions now, the second reps, the extra hours, the inward push to do one more set, one more step, one more try. Kobe taught that. Greatness isn't found at the finish line. It's forged in silence, and that wherever obsession meets purpose, legacy waits. He once said what mattered most wasn't how he was remembered, but how he inspired others to be remembered. That's the gift we hold now. Not stats, but standards. Not highlights, but habits. He gave everything, and in return, he left us with something rare. The blueprint for chasing impossible things. Quietly, relentlessly, beautifully. One day, the roar will fade. The jerseys will yellow with age. The arenas will chant new names. But somewhere, in a quiet gym, beneath a flickering light, a ball will bounce, and a dream will awaken. Not loud, just enough, because greatness doesn't disappear, it transitions. And if you listen closely, truly listen, you can still hear him. Whispers of the game.